that reasonable objections are not just approached by me from the point of view of how to refute them, rather that I always incorporate them into my judgments when thinking and give them the right to topple all my preconceived opinions, which I otherwise fancied, that you know. I always hope, by impartially viewing my judgments from the standpoint of others, to arrive at a third which is better than what I held previously. On top of that, even the mere lack of conviction in men of such insight always is proof to me that my theories at least lack clarity, evidence, or even something essential. Immanuel Kant. I come now to the last of the methods of Kant. That is what I call his sympathetic method. So the skeptical method was about suspending your judgment to first investigate, to first inquire further, and in doing so, you should also try to make the other side as strong as possible to find arguments for the other side. And then second, the critical method, based on realizing that all our errors come from the intellect not being mindful of the fact that the data it gets from the senses is subjective, is coming from a subjective perspective, and going from a preliminary judgment straight to a determining judgment. The critical method, which was about going to the source, going to the principles of a position, trying to see from which perspective someone, myself included, came to a certain position, and from there see if that position can even be held out of that source. And from there trying to not just refute a wrong position, but lift the illusion that makes the wrong position seem true to its adherents. Well, the sympathetic method is based on the same truth as the critical method. So it also is based on understanding what it means to have an error, understanding that the senses as such cannot be wrong because they don't judge at all, and the intellect as such cannot be wrong either because no force can ever contradict itself. The intellect can only make wrong judgments because it doesn't deal with the sensory data, so to say, in the right way. This leads directly to the conclusion that there can't be absolute error ever. Kant would say there are only partial errors. So when someone is wrong, they are never completely wrong, never 100% wrong, because if it was just wrong that someone was saying, why should he believe in it then? Why would it appear to be true to him if it was completely and utterly and obviously wrong? No, there must be some truth in it, some grain of truth, no matter how small, that makes it appear true from a certain perspective. Kant himself, he gives examples. He takes atheism as an example. And of course, in Kant's own day, that was quite the outrageous position. Everyone agreed that you mustn't be an atheist. Well, but Kant says we cannot say that the atheist is fully wrong. if, for example, someone is an atheist because he says, if there is a good God, how can there be evil in the world? Then Kant says this judgment of his contains three true judgments. It contains God is good, it contains there's evil in the world, and it contains good wants evil to be gone. So if someone is good, he wants to fight evil. All three of these statements are true, and the religious person can agree with all of them, Kant says. The atheist is only wrong in how he puts the three together, and thereby comes to the conclusion that there can't be a good God. This is, by the way, this is called the theodicy problem, and I will address it in a later lecture. When I come to Kant's philosophy of religion, I will talk about what he had to say to this. For now, maybe it's good to look at other examples, because nowadays atheism isn't such an outrageous position anymore. Nowadays, many people hold it to be true. It's not something we can all agree on being wrong. So maybe let's look at positions that most people would agree are wrong. Let's look at extreme positions. Even when you have an extreme ideology or an extreme belief, you can still find truth in it. For example, when I first learned that there are fundamentalist evangelical people in the US who, being Protestants, say that Catholics are not Christians, I just found that ridiculous, because they are not saying that Catholics are bad Christians, that they have a wrong interpretation of Christianity. No, there are some evangelicals who will tell you that Catholics aren't Christians at all. And that's obviously just nonsense, right? Like, you can't take that seriously as an opinion. Well, but then let's listen to their reasoning. Why are they saying that Catholics aren't Christians? Well, they will say that Catholics may believe in Jesus Christ, and they may go to church, they may go to mass, and they may believe in the Bible, they may pray, and so on. But that is not enough. To be a Christian, you must have a real personal relationship with Christ, and you must let Christ into your heart. What those evangelicals are saying is that Catholics just they just go to church, like maybe every Sunday, and then they sort of tick a box. So I have done my duty as a Christian. I have been Christian. I've been religious for the week, and apart from that, they let religion be the job of the priest, and they themselves don't really live religion in their day-to-day life. Now, whether this really is true of all Catholics is another question. Also, whether all the evangelicals really do have Christ in their heart and really do live religion in their daily lives, that's also another question. But the general statement that to be a Christian, it's not enough to just go to church sometimes and to just sort of outsource your religion to a priest, but rather to be an actual Christian, you must actually carry Christ in your heart. That general statement, I think, is true, and is something that everyone should be able to agree on. Or let's look at the extremists of another faith. Let's look at something like Salafism. In the West, it might mostly be associated just with puritanical fundamentalists who call for the violent jihad against all the unbelievers. But then, why is Salafism popular in large parts of the Mohammedan world, and especially also amongst young Mohammedans? Well, what are the Salafists saying? They are saying we, the Muslims, should be one ummah, one community, and we should not be split up into various countries and groups and sects that fight each other, that are plagued by civil wars. And also, we should not be the slaves and the subjects of various dictators and various autocrats that got rich through oil fields, and also of old face authorities, of some sheikhs and mullahs who represent a certain tradition and speak with the authority of tradition. We should only be subjects to God, and we should follow Islam as it was originally preached by Muhammad. We should not follow innovations made up by man. We should not adhere to some traditions that formed over the centuries and to scholars of faith who use that tradition to gain authority, but we should go back to simpler ways and to how it was really meant to be. And that is a message that many people can get behind because it is indeed a correct message. I mean, again, it is another question whether the Salafists really live according to this principle. They probably don't treat everyone as one ummah, as one community, but rather, like all fascists, I mean, all fascists want equality among people, but what fascists do is they don't want to do the hard work of reaching equality between people who are different. But rather, their way to reach equality is to just get rid of everyone who's different, so that then, of course, you have equality because everyone is the same. So they will, of course, say that only certain groups are true Muslims, only Sunnis are true Muslims, and if you are Shia, or God forbid, if you are an Alevite or whatever, you are not a Muslim. And also, it's questionable if they really go back to Islam as it was preached by Muhammad. Rather, it is quite easy to show that their interpretation is an extremely modern one, and ironically, it is one that is very much influenced by the West, by Western modernity, and by Western Christian fundamentalists. But nonetheless, the statement itself does have some merit. And so this is important. This is what you must do, Kant would say. You must not just fully dismiss and reject errors and falsehoods, but rather you must find a partial truth in them. And it is always there. Kant goes so far as to say that even the insane are not completely wrong. So they might be under some delusions and hallucinations and whatever. Someone might think he's the emperor of China or whatever. But even then, Kant says they couldn't completely make something up that has absolutely no grounds in reality. There must be some partial truth in what they are saying. Incidentally, that is more or less what 100 years later Freud would discover. Freud would insist that there is no sharp difference in quality between the mentally healthy and the mentally ill people, but rather that there is a gradual difference, a difference of degree. And he would insist that the delusions of the mentally ill people, their irrational beliefs or fears or whatever, um, they should not simply be dismissed as a sign of sickness, as a mere symptom, but rather they should be taken seriously. They don't come out of nothing, and the things that we dream, or the ways we misspeak, or also the ways that the insane see the world, all of these are not random, but are born out of a truth in a way, are born out of our drives, our wants that we may have pushed aside, that may be unconscious, that may be censored in some way, but still they are an expression of our drives or our fears, our hidden childhood trauma or whatever. Um, Now, in the case of Freud, he would actually use that as a starting point in therapy. He would say that we have to find the partial truth, to say it in Kant's words, not in Freud's, to find the partial truth in the insanity and to bring it out from the unconscious into the conscious, and that this was the way to heal the insane. Um, Kant does not go so far. He doesn't really suggest any methods for therapy of the mentally ill. Um, what he says about the mentally ill is more of a side note. Um, he doesn't draw any conclusions from that, but still it is one important step in the direction of Freud, and I think Kant would have seen merit in Freud's method. He could have recognized that it is basically applying and drawing the conclusions, drawing the consequences from a thought of Kant's. Kant's stance is a very aufklärt one. Because Aufklärung, in large parts, is about moving beyond good and evil, to borrow the title of one of Nietzsche's books. The unaufklärt, they have this tendency to divide everything into good and evil. And that in tendency is fascist. That leads straight to fascism, because it leads to saying evil must not exist. I mean, evil is just bad. There's nothing good in it. It has no merit. All it does is make life harder for the good. All it does is spoil the good. So we have to get rid of the evil. We have to exterminate it. Well, Aufklärung is about seeing good even in that which others would consider evil. Now, this is not some shallow relativism. This is not to say everything is equally good and there is no such thing as good or evil at all. But it is saying we must not look at the world as if there are things that just ought not to exist. We must learn to look with eyes that can spot the good even in those things. We must learn to justify even those things. Not excuse everything, but justify their existence, so to say. Kant does that in the quest for truth by basically saying certain theories in science, in the history of philosophy, are not just wrong. They don't just need to be thrown away, but rather they have some grain of truth that is worth being conserved and taken, even if the rest is put aside. But of course, this general stance of being beyond good and evil can go way beyond that. I am reminded of the Israelite tradition. I'm reminded of certain thoughts in Kabbalah and of people like Isaac Luria, because there you can find this concepts of the spark of holiness that can be found even in the dark places, even in the dirty things, that can be found in everything. Because everything comes from God and everything has a godly, a divine spark inside of it. This may have to do with the Jewish people experiencing evil in ways others have not. The Jewish people having a long history of hundreds or even thousands of years of oppression and persecution, and therefore coming to think more deeply about this question of evil and what does it mean? How can it be that there is evil, that God allows this evil? And well, I would say that this unaufklärt, this sort of fascist view of the world, that there is evil that just needs to go, it is an atheist view. Now, I'm not saying that it is a view that atheists in particular have. Many people of one or another faith have that view. But what I am saying is that by having that stance, those people of faith show that they are not truly religious. Their faith is superficial. It is probably something learned, something they were raised with, but not something that really affects their stance towards life, not something that is really in their heart. Because if I truly believe that everything comes from one true and good God, and that there is nothing that can happen in this universe, not a single hair can be harmed in this universe without the will of God, then I cannot believe in evil. I can only believe in evil if I believe that good is limited, if I believe that, if I have a sort of Manichaean belief that there are two forces in the universe, one of good and one of evil. So, in other words, if I believe that there isn't really a good God reigning supreme over everything. But if I am truly religious, not just believing in something, subscribing to some belief, but truly religious, then I would, like in the Jewish tradition I talked about, I would have to believe that there is a spark of holiness in everything, that God is in everything. And this, I think, is, though he doesn't express it in such religious terms, somewhat the stance that Kant takes towards life, and that we can observe since the time of Aufklärung, because again, this is at the core of Aufklärung, which since then we can observe all the great philosophers like Kant or Fichte, or I mean, when it comes to Nietzsche, it is even in the name of one of his famous books, and that is the name I borrowed, Beyond Good and Evil. They all, since then, in one way or another, have displayed this tendency to look at the world not as if there were parts that just need to be gone, that are just wrong, but rather to try and see the good, the holy, so to say, in everything. Kant himself, he always does this. You can see that in his writings, that he again and again tries to find the truth in the positions of others. I will just give one example, and I will purposefully give more unimportant example, an example from a side topic, not from the main topics of his philosophy. Um, and that is that at some point he discusses the question of race and the question of the differences in various groups of humans, like different skin colors, and how that comes about. And one opinion held by some natural scientists in Kant's time was that it is the power of imagination. So they were basically saying, when you have a black mother who gets pregnant and she herself is black, the man who got her pregnant is black. If she's living in Africa, she's surrounded by black people. She probably hasn't even seen white people. So when during pregnancy she imagines her child, of course she will imagine the child to be black, and that imagination will turn the child in her womb black. So it is the imaginations of the mother that shape the child, so to say. So then, of course, a white woman in Europe will imagine having a white child. And this supposedly could also explain why children looked similar to their parents. Um, like, even if a woman may have cheated on her husband, um, the child will probably then look similar not to her husband but to the man she cheated with, because even though she tries to hide her cheating from her husband, she still knows the truth, and she still during pregnancy will be thinking of that other man, and therefore she will sort of imprint or form that child in her womb to look similar to that other man. Now, to us nowadays, this might sound like a pretty silly theory, and Kant did disagree with it. And Kant is saying, no, there must be certain, as he calls it, germs. We, of course, nowadays, knowing a bit more, we would say genes, in humans, so in the white mother or in the black mother, that are passed down to the children, that determine, for example, the skin color or other attributes of the children. But even so, Kant doesn't just dismiss this other position and doesn't just say, okay, this is simply wrong. Rather, he asks, what is the principle of these natural scientists out of which they came to this position? And his answer is, their principle is basically what we call Occam's razor nowadays. So Occam's razor says that we shouldn't multiply our principles, right? So when we have a question that needs to be answered, when we want to explain certain phenomena, we should try to explain them through principles, through forces of nature that are already known to exist, rather than making up a new principle. We should not do that if we can help it. And we should try to get back to as few principles, as few laws of nature as possible, instead of explaining each new phenomenon with a new force of nature. And well, in Kant's day, force through which certain attributes could be passed down from parents to children was not yet known. This sounded almost like sort of magic. And so Kant admits that here he is basically with his theory of the germs, he's basically violating Occam's razor. He is introducing a new principle into natural science, a principle which he believed to be necessary here and to work better than all the possible explanations through already known principles, but still a new principle. And the other natural scientists, with their theory of the power of imagination, they were reluctant to introduce a new principle, Kant says, and so they tried to find something which we already knew about. And we already do know that our imagination is something that exists and is something that can hold certain power. I mean, I talked about this in my lecture on the philosopher as a healer, how to Kant himself, the imagination, the way our mind works, can influence the body in certain ways. In the case of the hypochondriac, it influences the body in a bad way. It makes us have bad and uneasy and painful feelings that we imagine. And in the case of the philosopher, of the aufklärt person who deals with his body in a wise way, the imagination can help to cure, or at least to lessen the pains of certain illnesses in a certain way. So that is how Kant explains, even when he disagrees with an opinion, how he explains how people who are probably not complete idiots came to hold such an opinion and came to believe in it. And even from a pragmatic standpoint, so a standpoint of mere prudence, prudence being the art of reaching our goal, and the art of influencing other people, even from a pragmatic standpoint, Kant says, we should, when debating someone, when talking with someone, and when trying to convince someone that his position is wrong and ours is right, we should approach him not as an enemy, but rather as a friend. We should not fight him, trying to defeat him and his opinion and to refute him and to show him how stupid he is, but rather we should try to help him see the light, so to say. We should try to help him, Kant says, understand himself better than he understands himself. So what Kant says is, even from a pragmatic standpoint, even if you leave morality aside, it is the smartest thing when you have a discussion with someone to first, even if you disagree, look for the partial truth in his opinions and to first agree with him on the parts that you can agree with. So he doesn't feel like you think he's a complete idiot and everything he says is nonsense, but rather he feels validated to a degree. And then Kant would say, try to change his opinion almost without letting him realize that you have a different opinion and that you are disagreeing. So don't just say, what you are saying is wrong. It's wrong for this and that reason. You must change your mind. But rather say, I agree with you on the main points. You are right in this and that regard. But maybe here in this detail you missed something, or maybe let's think further about this detail. Or doesn't it follow from what you say that we should also assume this and that? So you are slowly changing his opinion and making him agree with you. You're sort of taking his hand and slowly, without letting him realize, leading him over into your camp. And even if you do have to let him see that you disagree, Kant would say you must not treat his opinion as simply stupid, because that will probably just make the other person stubborn. that will probably just make him insist that he is right after all, because if his position is stupid, and if he now comes to agree with you that his position is indeed wrong, then that means he's now admitting that he is stupid. And he probably doesn't want that, so he will rather insist that his position is not stupid. So it is better, Kant says, to, even when you disagree, to stress that his position does seem true from a certain perspective, to stress that everyone could, if they had this perspective, could have been fooled into believing this position. Make the other person feel like you yourself could also, like you yourself can see how he could have come to make this error, how he could have come to hold this belief, even if it is wrong. Then he will be more likely to be willing to change his mind. Or Kant says, try to not say that his position is absurd, because that would mean that he himself is absurd, but rather try to show him that the consequences of his position are absurd. So if someone is saying A is true, don't say, oh, how stupid A is, but just say C is stupid. And if you think about it, you will realize that from A follows B, and from B follows C. So if you want to believe in A, you would have to believe in C. But we both know that C is stupid and that you don't want to believe in C, so therefore you must let go of A. Because thereby what you're doing is you're basically not accusing the other person of holding a clearly absurd position, but rather you are saying that only the further conclusions, the further consequences of that position, if you think it through more, only they are absurd, and you are basically saying that the other person would likely agree, and that as soon as he would realize that something absurd follows from his position, he would let go of that position. So you are again speaking not to his stupidity, but to his intelligence. You are again treating him as a friend who is just helping him to understand himself better. Kant also says, if you really believed another person was stupid, you should not try to argue with him. Because no one is more foolish than he who argues with a fool. If you speak to someone and speak through reason and try to convince him through reasonable arguments, then you can only speak to his reason, not to his stupidity. So if you believe that he has no reason, that he is only stupid, then you are stupid for using reasonable arguments. You might as well try to debate with an animal, which also has no capacity for reason and for understanding reasonable arguments. If, however, you do assume the other person to have some rationality, which you must if you want to talk to them and have a rational debate, then you must also assume that whatever they are saying cannot be completely and utterly stupid and irrational. Because then surely any rational person would see it. Maybe to you it seems obvious that a certain statement is wrong and stupid, but if it is really that obviously wrong, then anyone who is not stupid should see it. So either the other person is stupid and not worth talking to, or the statement is not as obviously wrong as you think it is. The statement has, from a certain perspective, some merit and some grain of truth in it, at least. This is, I think, a very important remark of Kant's. And by the way, Kant doesn't just say that you must not talk to someone completely stupid for his own sake, because when something is obviously wrong, any person with some rationality should be able to see that it is obviously wrong. They don't need you to explain it if it is so obvious. Um, but one might argue that, okay, maybe there's a third party, maybe there are others, there are onlookers, there are people reading your debate, and by debating a stupid person, maybe you can't refute them and change their mind, but maybe you are helping other people so that they don't fall for that stupid person. But even that Kant doesn't agree with, because he would say, if what the other person says is really that stupid and that obviously wrong, then you must assume that onlookers can see it without your help. And if they don't see it, then they too are completely and utterly stupid, and then your arguments again won't help. Again, if you assume that either the person you debate or that a third person who listens to that debate and watches that debate is not completely out of their mind, then you must take any position that they hold or that you think could at least persuade them. Then you must take any such position seriously and as something which contains a bit of rational truth, because otherwise people who aren't completely irrational wouldn't fall for it. And the same thing, which Kant here says for the theoretical, so for debates about truth and error, the same he would say about the practical, so for debates about good and evil. If you want to make a bad person better, then you must assume that they are not completely evil and rotten to their core. Because if they are, then there's no way to moralize them. You can only moralize them by speaking to the good that is still in them. And if you believe that someone doesn't have any good in them, then you must not then you must not try to moralize him. Then you must not say, oh, what you are doing is evil, stop doing it, because he won't care if he is so evil. You can then, of course, try to take him out in some way so that he doesn't cause more harm in the world. But you cannot try to make him a better person unless you believe that at least to some degree there is still good in him. So Kant would say you can only improve a person's opinions and beliefs through their intellect, and you can only improve a person's actions and morality through their heart. So if they don't have an intellect or a heart, or you don't believe them to have one, you might as well stop trying. As Kant would say, no physician can bring a dead person back to life, and no gardener can bring new life into a dead tree. That would be magic. That would be a power we might believe God to possess, to turn the dead into a living thing, to take a bit of clay, form a human out of it, and then give his breath into it and thereby animate it. But we as humans, we can't do that. We can't give the power, the force of life to something else. We can only help the power of life that is already there. We can only nurture it and help it grow stronger. So if someone is sick and their life force is diminished, but still there to a small degree, then the physician can help to make it stronger again. And likewise, we can't bring rationality or goodness into someone who doesn't have any of it at all. We can only make a person who is a little rational or a little good, no matter how little, we can only help such a person to expand on that rationality and on that goodness. I think this is a very important remark Kant makes here, and this is something we should take to heart, especially considering the utterly poisoned culture of debate that we have going on. Um, because you can see that in political debates, often um, it is not a real discussion trying to make the other side see the light, but rather it is merely a fight and a war. Maybe one with words and not with weapons, where you don't outright kill the other one, but still it is a war where you try to just defeat and destroy the other one. People are often just screeching at one another, and they are just accusing each other of being stupid or being evil, and there is no charity in it at all. There is no willingness to consider that maybe thousands and millions or even billions of people who are on the other side, who see things differently than me, that maybe, just maybe, they are not all idiots and assholes. Maybe they do have some point. They might still ultimately be wrong, and I might still be right. This is not advocating for relativism, but they are probably not wrong completely. What they are saying probably contains some truth. They probably have some point. But here, unfortunately, that is lacking, which is the basis and the fundament of Aufklärung, that is self-criticism. I've seen it, and not just in political debates or on online debates or whatever, but also in private, in personal debates between people. I've been in situations where someone has screamed at me and at others, screaming, "Oh, are you all stupid? Why don't you just get it? I don't get why you don't get it." And that is, of course, something you should never do, and that is quite ridiculous to do. Especially in a situation like that, where it's not just one person who seems stupid to you, but where everybody seems stupid to you. It just speaks to your lack of self-reflection, that the thought doesn't even cross your mind, maybe I'm the stupid one. I'm not saying it has to be that way. I'm not saying the majority is always right, and if a single person disagrees with the majority, he is always wrong. I mean, the majority has also believed for the longest time that the sun revolves around the earth, and that was wrong too. Of course, minority opinion can be true, but at least when the majority disagrees with you, you should not just get frustrated with them and just accuse everybody but yourself to be stupid, but rather you should reflect on yourself and wonder, is it possible that I am in the wrong? Is it possible that the others disagree, that not a single other person sees the truth of what I'm saying, because actually it isn't true? I do this usually. I've done this for the longest time. When I talk to people, even when I know that they are very unaufklärt and that they are very irrational, I still talk to them as if they were on my level. I still talk to them and debate them and give counter arguments as if they were rational beings capable of listening to rational arguments, even in some situations where I probably knew or at least assumed better, where I assumed that giving rational counter arguments was pointless. I would still always do that or walk away altogether. But I would not just scream at the other person that he's stupid or evil, because what's the point? If I assume that he is, I'm wasting my time with him. if I do want to invest time into talking with him, I must assume that he is not stupid or evil. So I will add that this is the best way to gain enemies in some cases. It might seem counterintuitive, and you might not believe me at first, but I mean what I say when I say that, at least with some people, of course not with everyone, but with some people, they would be less mad at you and they would hate you less if in a debate you ended up getting mad and punching their face. They would, of course, not be happy about that, and they would, of course, be angry at you at first, but maybe they would eventually, after some weeks or months or years, be willing to forgive it, saying something like, "Oh yeah, we all sometimes get mad. We all sometimes get aggressive and agitated. I've been there too." While on the other hand, if you take them seriously, if you take people who don't take themselves seriously, if you treat them as rational beings despite acting irrational, they will hate you for it. And they will hate you with a burning passion, and they will hate you till the end of their lives. Precisely because you remind them how they should be and how they could be, and you remind them that they have a responsibility and a duty to be rational, and you remind them how pathetic their current state is. And that is something they won't forgive. Again, I'm not speaking about everyone, but there are such people who would be less unforgiving if you do treat them like idiots or like they were evil, and who are less forgiving if you take them seriously still. On the other hand, I also want you to consider that, going from what Kant teaches us here, we must never be insulted by someone disagreeing with us as long as they take us seriously and give arguments. If there's one thing I hate, it is people, especially when it comes to the practical side, when it comes to moral questions, it is people who get angry when they are criticized. That speaks to a very low character. So, for example, one example you can often witness, let's say someone is doing or saying something racist, and then I tell him, hey, stop, consider what you've just said there, that was racist. Often I've had people getting very angry over being told that. Being like, what? Are you calling me a racist? No, I just called you a non-racist, in fact. Because if you think about it, if I assumed you really were a racist, and now you said something racist, then I wouldn't tell you, hey, please be mindful what you just said was racist. Because if I believe you are an actual racist, then I will assume that you won't mind having said something racist. Then I will assume that you will happily say, yeah, sure, I said something racist, so what, fuck off. If I tell you that what you said was racist, then I must be assuming that you have some good in you, that you recognize that racism is bad. You just don't recognize that this specific case, this thing you said is racist. So I'm assuming that you don't want to be racist, and therefore I'm telling you what you just said was racist. Please reconsider it. And so I don't see why you should get mad over that. And I could be wrong. Maybe what you said wasn't racist. Maybe I'm overreacting. Then you can argue against me. Then you can explain to me how I'm wrong. But you must not get angry as if I had accused you of racism. Because again, if I accused you of actual racism, not just saying something racist, not just holding some racist beliefs, but actually being racist in your core, then I wouldn't talk to you because I wouldn't see a way to make you stop. So this is why I have very little tolerance for people who get angry when you criticize them, who say, what, you are disagreeing with me, you are giving counter arguments, do you think I'm stupid because you are calling my position stupid? Or what, you are telling me that what I'm doing is evil, that it is bad, that I should stop doing it? Are you saying I'm evil? Are you saying I'm a monster? No, in fact, disagreement, as long as it is not a mere attack, but actual rational disagreement, giving actual arguments, disagreement is always a compliment. Because by telling you that you are wrong, and by explaining it to you, by giving arguments, I am assuming that you want to be right. I'm assuming that you have a good will to do better. And I'm assuming that you are able to understand that you are wrong if it is explained to you. I'm giving you a compliment, and you react by being insulted. That says a lot about you. So, personally, I don't remember ever getting angry over criticism. I might dismiss it if I think it's wrong and silly, but I don't get angry over it. Any criticism should be allowed, no matter how harsh, no matter how polemical, as long as it is still rational and in good faith. Just if it is simple attacks and insults hurled at you, then I can understand how you might get angry over that. But otherwise, by getting angry over it, you are insulting yourself more than any other person ever could. And that is, in fact, when I do dismiss people and when I do walk away, when I see them react to valid criticism with being angry. Because thereby they show me that they lack what is at the core of Aufklärung, that is love for truth. To be truly aufklärt, you must take truth more seriously than yourself. You must say, fiat veritas et pereat mundus. Let there be truth, even if the world may perish. You must be selfless, so to say. It must be about the matter at hand and rationally discussing the matter and arriving at the truth, and not about you and your self-image or the image others have of you. So if you get angry at criticism, what you're showing is that to you the most important thing is not having the truth or being good, but rather the most important thing is your ego. Looking like you have the truth, looking like you are good, not actually being it. Going back to Kant, he says that there are two types of conflicts. You can be in conflict with someone as friends or as enemies. The conflict of enemies is a conflict where you have different interests that collide with each other. So, for example, if I walk down the street and some thief is trying to grab my bag, and I hold onto that bag, and now we are struggling, we are enemies because we have different interests. I want to keep my bag. He wants to keep my bag. We can't keep it both. The conflict of friends is when you have the same interest, Kant says, and you are only in disagreement about how to best reach that interest. Then you should consider yourself friends. Then it should not be about winning, about defeating the other. It should be about that common shared interest of yours. And you should band together to reach your interest together and to find out which of you is right, which of you probably has the better way, the better method of reaching that shared interest. And this conflict of friends, that is the type of conflict we should have when it is about the truth. So we should have, especially in science and in philosophy, but also outside of that, when we want to try and find the truth in a certain question, everyone who cares for the truth should consider the others friends and not enemies just because they hold different opinions, because they are not holding a different opinion because they just want to be contrary and they just want to disagree with you, but because they actually think this is the truth, just like you think your opinion is the truth. And both of you, at least that is how it should be, both of you should not want your opinion to win. Both of you should want the truth. So if it happens that your opinion is wrong, you should want to be convinced that it is wrong. And so should the other. This is also why any aufklärt person will not be able to stand the debates we nowadays have in, I don't know, in talk shows or in political debates, in political duels, because there they are in conflict with each other, not as friends, but as enemies. They don't come together with the same interest. Like several politicians who all want what's best for their country and for the state and just have a different opinion about how to get there, and debating what would be the best way to improve things. No, they have different opinions. They have their different ideologies or their different careers and their different strive for power, and they just want to win. They just want to defeat their enemy. And that is why these talk shows and these debates, they are so dishonest. The people there are not actually talking to each other. That is why you never see in a political debate or in a debate in a parliament, you don't usually see one politician being convinced by another, stopping and saying, hey, you know what, you actually gave a good argument, you are right, I am going to support your side and vote with your side now. You don't see that happening. Why? Because all the arguments are so bad? Because both sides present such bad arguments? No, because they don't actually care about what is true or right. They care about winning. In these debates, they are just propaganda. They are coming there not to talk to each other, but rather to show off to the public, to the potential supporters and voters. They are there because this is a platform, and the louder they can scream against their enemy, the louder they can counter his points, even if they are valid points, with outrageous attacks or whatever, the better. Because that is probably what gets them elected. When friends debate who have the same interest, who are concerned with truth, they will not talk over each other or attack each other or scream at each other, but rather they will have a quiet, calm, honest debate. Everyone giving their points, considering each other's points, working together as friends. And again, this is, Kant says, this is what should be done, especially in science, especially in philosophy. We should not have the interest of our philosophical school in mind, but the interest of truth. We should not, if a philosopher has written a big philosophical work, a big theory, a big system, his interest should not be to defend what he has built and what his fame is built on. His interest should be in truth. So if someone attacks the system that you have held for 20 years and that has made you famous, and he has good arguments, then let go of your system. Because you only, presumably, hopefully, you only came to believe in that system because you believed it was true. And this Kant calls a logical duty. So logical is not meant here in the closer sense, by which we might understand the word today, but rather logical means everything pertaining to the quest for truth, or everything pertaining to science, everything pertaining to the theoretical. But on top of it being a logical duty, Kant also calls it a moral duty. Because that is moral behavior in a debate. That is moral behavior towards your fellow human beings. But this requires a certain sympathy of heart, a certain empathy, Kant would say. It requires a certain morality of us to care less about ourselves and about winning in a debate, but also about the other person. Kant says, even if the other person is wrong, even if he is saying something very stupid and outrageous or very evil, we should not be happy about having found something through which we can attack him, but rather we should be sad for him. Sad because he is wrong. And we should try to correct him, not to look smarter, not to win the debate, but so that he stops being wrong. And here we come back to what I talked about in the lecture on what is wisdom. The philosopher in the world sense, the philosopher as a sage, is the one who isn't working towards particular interests, right? That is what the technicians of reason did, using their reason to come up with techniques to reach this or that purpose, but rather the wise person has the ultimate purpose of humanity in mind and works toward the common interests of humanity. And therefore he is responsible for the advancement, for the progress, for the Aufklärung of humankind. And that is why he will never just laugh at someone who is wrong. He will never just dismiss someone who is wrong. He will never gloat at that or be happy that he can appear smarter. He will be sad when someone is wrong, and he will try to correct the errors in the world. But so far, I have spoken mainly from a pragmatic perspective. So what is the smartest way if you want to convince someone? And from a moral perspective, how would a good person deal with someone who's wrong? But all of this, what I said, now leads to this third method of Kant's that I wanted to talk about. And this is a method that he says might not be used in any situation in life, but it should be used especially in science and in philosophy. And that is, when there is disagreement between two people or groups of people, schools of thought, in science, Kant says we should take it seriously. When someone disagrees with us, we should take this disagreement seriously. And we should at first suspend our judgment, not try to refute the other side right away and prove our side, but suspend our judgment. That was what the skeptical method already said. And then we should ask, how can it be that the other side disagrees, that they say something different from what I say? What might be their reason for that? And that you might still say belongs to the critical method. But now, if in this critical question you came to the conclusion that the other side is honest, because it could be that they are disagreeing with you, but they have dishonest, they have personal reasons for disagreeing, there's personal interest involved. Maybe they are just too lazy to think about it. maybe they stick to the opinion that they have been brought up with, that they have learned in their school years, and they just don't want to change their opinion or question their opinion now. Maybe they are partisan and just want their party, their school to win. Maybe it is about their fame, as I already said. Maybe some famous scientists who became famous with a new theory now will defend that theory even if it is disproven, because his fame depends on it. When you can find such personal interests on the other side, that is one thing. But if, Kant says, if you find that in a certain matter there are two sides, and on both sides you have sharp minds, you have smart people on both sides, or even geniuses on both sides, like might be the case in science or in philosophy, and you find that both of them are not partisan or not driven by self-interest, but both of them are selflessly looking for truth. And still, despite being selfless and despite being smart, they still come to different opinions. Then Kant says it is reasonable to assume that neither side is just completely right or completely wrong. It is reasonable to assume that both sides have a partial truth. Both sides have good points. Otherwise, smart, sharp-minded people without personal interests in the matter would not have been convinced by this or by that side. And in this case, what you should do is try to combine both positions. Try to find a middle way, a new third position, in which the partial truth of both sides is retained and put together with the partial truth of the other side. I will stress this is only if you can. I will stress this only should be applied in cases where both sides are honest, both sides are good, both sides are truly interested in truth. So when you are a non-racist and you are debating with some racist, with some Nazi, with someone from the alt-right, you don't have to try and find the middle position between his racism and your non-racism, because here you can assume that he's just an asshole and that he has personal interest. He wants to, for example, save his way of living here in the West and not share his wealth with other people who happen to be born in poorer conditions. But if you can assume that the other side is arguing in good faith and is being honest and sincere, then you should take their position seriously and try to find a middle way. And I will also stress that this middle way is not some vague, half-baked compromise. I know we live in a time, in an ausgeklärt time, a time of relativism, a time that likes to say there is not such a thing as the truth. Everyone is right in their own way. Everyone has their own truth. That is not what Kant is saying. Kant is saying there is the truth. He's just saying that to find the truth, we need to come to a more complete perspective by combining the partial perspectives of different people and what is partially true in them. So I used, when talking about the skeptical method, I used the example of the house that is painted in different colors. Let's say I stand at the front of the house and I say the house is red because I see a red wall. And let's say someone else is standing on the other side of the house and is saying that the house is green. Well, as long as I have reason to believe that this other person is honest and sincere and talking to me in good faith, that he's not lying for some reason, then I should take the fact seriously that he's saying the house is green, even though it appears red to me. And then I could think about the fact that we both look at it from different sides. We both see different parts of the house. And I could arrive at the third position, that maybe the house is partially red and partially green. That maybe it isn't one color, but the different sides have different colors. And that is what Kant means when talking about the middle way. As a side note, that might be historically interesting, Kant was probably influenced in coming up with this method by a thinker of his time called Bilfinger, who was a Wolffian thinker. And Bilfinger was very interested in Chinese thought. So at the time, there had been missions to China. The Jesuits had tried to Christianize China. And so China and the Chinese culture, the Chinese thought, had come into the consciousness of European thinkers. And the Leibniz Wolffian school had, from its founders, always had some interest in China. So Leibniz himself had been interested in the Chinese characters, for example. And Wolff had given a famous speech about the Chinese and their morality, saying that they had good moral values, that they had virtues, that they had good moral theories, even without having a Christian or even any natural religion. That speech cost him his professorship in Halle. He was banished by the Prussian king. But there was this interest, this sort of openness for China. Though, of course, people still knew very little of China. The great thinkers and scholars in Europe usually didn't speak or read Chinese. They only had a few Chinese texts that were translated into Latin, probably translated by some Jesuit, and it probably wasn't a good translation by modern standards. The translations often would turn Chinese ideas into something that was more familiar and more easily understood to the Europeans, and thereby grossly misrepresent and misinterpret them. But still, there was beginning to be an exchange with the East, and this Bilfinger seems to have been reading some translated Taoist texts, and from there have been influenced to seek out the middle way, to seek out a sort of balance between different positions. Now, this would certainly be interesting if Kant and the big Kantian revolution in philosophy, in Western philosophy, had indirectly been influenced by Chinese thought. Just how deep the influence is hard to say. I mean, I can't say how much Bilfinger himself really was influenced by actual, authentic Taoist thought. And then even if he was, it would still remain another question just how much Kant was influenced by Bilfinger. This method of Kant's, this finding the middle way, is something he talks about even in his very first book. And here he refers to Bilfinger doing something similar. But it's kind of unclear to me if Kant really took this method from Bilfinger, or if rather he is sort of saying, well, I, as a newcomer, as a scholar, I'm not the only one doing this. Here, look, Bilfinger has already done the same as I'm doing, and you should take an example from him. So that would be a question for the historical scholars, just how deep the influence of Taoism on Kant really was. I would definitely say that this method cannot be just taken over from Bilfinger. maybe reading him had Kant coming to more clarity. But this method is very much, I would say, in Kant's nature. It is just his whole character to apply this method. Um, it is a method that probably was influenced also by the way he was raised. I talked about this in my lecture on Kant's life, about the influence of his pietist parents. And Kant would later on, even when he was old, he would still talk about their influence and how they impressed him. He would mention that for a time in Königsberg there was a conflict between the Riemers. Remember, I said that his father was a Riemer, so a small craftsman making belts and such things out of leather, and the saddlers, so the craftsmen who made saddles. And there was this conflict about the rights of the various craftsmen and the various guilds and who can do what. And Kant's family was not wealthy to begin with. So this conflict was about their very substance in a way. But still, Kant later recounted that even in private, even at home, he never once witnessed his father and mother speaking badly of these saddlers who were in conflict with his father. They, with their pietist, with their Christian ethos, they only spoke good of them. They only spoke and thought of them with sympathy, understanding where they came from, wishing them nothing but good. And this is something that impressed Kant very much as a child. And this, I think, largely influenced him in coming up with this method. You can see this in how he deals with other thinkers, even thinkers like Epicure or Pyrrhon, or even to some degree Spinoza, who in his day or in previous days had been slandered quite a lot. Even those Kant respected, and even in their thinking, he tried to find the truth. He tried to find how their opinions, even if ultimately wrong or incomplete, how they might indeed seem to be true from a certain perspective. How serious and sincere thinkers like them might have arrived at those opinions. And you can also see it in how Kant deals with those who disagree with him. Even later in his critical period, he would not think of the disagreements and counter arguments as attacks on his system, because he would assume that the other thinker wanted the same thing as he wanted, that is the truth. He would consider them important remarks or questions, or things that needed to be elaborated, or that needed to be thought about more. And he rarely ever got polemical, only when he really had grounds to assume that the other person was being dishonest, that the other person was twisting Kant's position, not just misunderstanding it or disagreeing with it, but twisting it on purpose. Only that was something that Kant didn't like. And this method is something that Kant has always applied. Even in his very first text that he published at just 22, he's trying to reconcile the party of Leibniz and the people who follow him, and the party of Descartes and the people who follow him. The text was about a matter of physics, of dynamics, and there were these two different parties holding different positions, and Kant didn't just subscribe to one side or the other, but rather he tried forming a third position that showed how both were right from a certain perspective. And in his whole critical philosophy, you can always see him reconcile different positions. So those who believe in freedom and the predeterminists who say there is no free will. Those who say that the highest good is in happiness, and those who say that the highest good is in virtue. Um, the rationalists and the empirists, dogmatism and skepticism. Again and again, Kant is dealing with two opposing positions, and what he is doing is not saying one side is wrong and needs to be dismissed and one side is right, but what he is doing is saying both are partially right from a certain perspective, and he, Kant, is trying to find a third position that reconciles them and that brings peace between them, so to say. And this method is so important to Kant's whole thinking and his whole philosophy that you can't really understand him if you don't read him through the lens of this method, through trying to find the partial truths in various opposing positions and trying to bring them together. So anyone who talks about Kant without mentioning and stressing this method is giving you only a distorted picture of Kant. And I hope that now that I did talk about it, you will try to look out for this method, both in case you read Kant yourself, and also if you keep listening to what I will have to say about Kant in further lectures. Try to look for Kant again and again, trying to combine opposing opinions into a new one that contains the truth of both of them. To Kant himself, because this method was more than just a method to him, because it is basically just an expression of his nature and his character, his, I would say, his humanity and his sympathy for other human beings, taking them seriously, not just wanting to defeat them and be better than them, but wanting to guide everyone to truth and wanting to find the good and the true in everyone. This method, unlike the skeptical and critical method, is not given such a clear name usually in his writings. Sometimes he talks about being fair towards others. So you could call it the method of fairness. You could also call it the pluralistic method, because it is very closely related to his concept of pluralism, of being able to think in someone else's stead and from someone else's perspective. This pluralism of Kant is something I will talk about in a much later lecture when I talk about his whole concept of Aufklärung. But I find that the name that seems most fitting, or that he uses the most in his writings, is calling it teilnehmende Methode. And that is a little difficult to translate, because teilnehmen, the word has two parts. The first is teil, which means part, and the second is nehmen, which means to take. So literally it means to take part. And teilnehmen as a verb means to participate. So I could call it the participating or participatory method. And maybe that would also be fitting, because it is about participating in the quest for truth, in the common human quest for truth together with the others. Not fighting them, not being at war with other thinkers, but participating. But then in German, the word Teilnehmung can, apart from this literal meaning, also have a more metaphorical meaning. And then it does mean something like sympathy or empathy, because it means basically you are participating, you are taking part in someone else's feelings or in someone else's interests and what matters for them and what matters to them. So, for example, when a friend of mine, when a loved one of his would die, um, I would express my Anteilnahme, my taking part in his pain. And that is why I have chosen to translate this teilnehmende Methode with sympathetic method. But as I said, you might also translate it as participating method or whatever. Of course, this stance of Kant's is not exclusive to Kant. For example, this whole thing reminds me very much of certain Jewish traditions. After all, the Israelite religion is the religion of the struggle with God and struggle with one another. I mean, there are jokes about how when you put 3 Jews into a room, you will have 10 opinions or whatever. There's a great tradition amongst the rabbis of debating, of being in conflict with each other, of struggling with each other. Like in the Talmud, the whole Talmud is basically one big debate. And I would argue that not just the Talmud, but also the Old Testament is one big debate. And the thing is that there is this concept or this virtue, and to me it's one of the highest virtues or one of the most beautiful concepts in the Israelite religion, of disagreement for the sake of heaven. So we might be used nowadays to religious disagreements, basically meaning that you accuse each other of being heretics and going to hell, or maybe even fighting each other in crusades and jihads and burning each other at the stake. And many people seem to think that if you believe one thing and then someone else disagrees with you and believes another thing, he must be going to hell because clearly he has the wrong religion. But in this rabbinical tradition, there is this thought that you might disagree on, for example, how to read and how to understand and interpret the law that God has given, and you might debate each other, but you're debating as friends, not as enemies. You're not burning the other rabbi at the stake because he has the wrong opinion, because you all share the same interest, that is heaven. It is not about you being right or the other person being right. It is about understanding God's revelation and God's law in the right way and doing what God wants. And there is the thought that in the end, when two people served God in different ways, interpreting the laws in different ways, but they both did so honestly and sincerely and truly believing that their interpretation was the right one, then God will not send one to heaven and one to hell, but he will honor both of their sincerity and both of their honest striving towards him, towards God. So this disagreement for the sake of heaven, I mean, Kant was pretty ignorant towards anything Jewish, and he didn't assume that there was much merit in the Jewish tradition. And if you ask me, that means that he didn't apply his sympathetic method to the Jews enough. I will talk about this in a much later lecture in my whole conclusion of all of these lectures. But I think if he had been more open and if he had known about this concept of the disagreement for the sake of heaven, he should have liked it and agreed with it, because this is basically what Kant is talking about, right? Now, the sympathetic method of Kant, that's the last remark I want to make here, would go on to have a huge influence in the history of philosophy. I would probably go so far as to argue that formally, this is the biggest influence Kant's philosophy had. So we can make a difference between the material side of his philosophy. So, what is the content of his thoughts? What is it that he is saying is true? And then there's the formal side. How is he doing philosophy? And of course, Kant also had a huge influence in many ways with the matter of his philosophical statements. But if we put that aside and just consider the formal side of his philosophizing, I would say this method of his had the biggest influence. Because in one way or another, it was picked up by the thinkers who came after Kant. Fichte has his sympathetic method, where you put two parts together to form something new. So Fichte would stress that they are not two parts pre-existing independently of each other, but rather you have one part, and then the other part is only created by adding it to the first part, and thereby creating the third part. Or, of course, the most famous influence of this sympathetic method of Kant is in Hegel, who has this dialectic method, which was not only used by himself, but which then was taken up by other people who were in turn influenced by Hegel. People like Marx, for example, who used this dialectic method that Hegel had applied to the spirit to apply it to a materialistic interpretation of history based on economic conditions. This dialectic method is often described, even though that is maybe a little simplistic and that is not exactly how Hegel says it, but it is often described as taking a thesis, looking at the antithesis, so the opposing opinion, and combining both of them into a synthesis. And again, Hegel does this with the spirit. Marx does this, being a materialist, does this with the economic conditions and the societies in history, saying that it is the contradictions which drive history. And for both, for Hegel or for Marx, contradiction doesn't mean that I just have two opposing sides and one side just wins and the other side is just crushed, but the contradiction leads to a combination of thoughts of both sides, which contains both of them in it. Now, I don't want to say that these methods of the ones that came after Kant, of people like Fichte or like Hegel, are the same as Kant's method. I don't want to say that Hegel's dialectic is the exact same as Kant's sympathetic method. That would be too simplistic. But it is certainly greatly influenced and inspired by that. And that is one of the reasons why I keep saying that if you want to understand the last 200 years of thinking, of philosophy, you should start with Kant. Because in one way or another, directly or more indirectly through an intermediary, so in the case of Marx, he didn't study Kant himself so much as he studied Hegel. Directly or indirectly, the thinkers who came after Kant were influenced by him and can only be truly understood through him. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Garnau Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Samet Özkilic, Christos Pai, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, as well as to all others who support me and my Aufklärung course.